Hey everyone, I'm Jan Henning from FlippedNormals here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the very exciting AI policy that was put out by Netflix not too long ago. I don't know if it's as much of a policy, but it's more like guidelines for their vendors specifically. And when this first came out, both Henning and I were pretty excited to see a large company like this actually take some kind of stand when it came to AI and artists. But as we started digging more and more into the policy, it started becoming more and more vague, to be honest. On the surface, when you don't look too deep into it, it sounds like Netflix is actually standing with artists. But the wording very quickly becomes, let's call it legal speak. And a lot of the wording in there seems to be to protect Netflix from any sort of legal disputes rather than actually protecting artists and the work that all of us love and are very passionate about.
So we're not really going to be covering the policy per se, because that's boring, right? We're not going to go through line by line or anything like that. We aren't actually going to be talking too much about the specific language itself. We're not more going to be talking about what does this mean for the overall industry. The reason we aren't going to be doing that is, like I said, first off, that's not particularly exciting, but also because it's a bit wish-washy, right? There was a lot of ambiguity in this one here, so there's no point in going in depth in something that's really ambiguous anyway. But I really started reading this with actually a really positive view of this, and then on second reading, that was where I was like, wait a minute, this here doesn't actually say anything at all in most cases. So it's almost like it's presented as this is more pro artist than it is, and the more we got into it, the more we realized, well, this is obviously this document here is straight up for the partners of Netflix, right? It's not for public consumption really, and it becomes very clear that the target audience here is obviously the vendors making content, but it's here to protect Netflix, right? This is not here to protect the artists themselves. This here is something to ensure that Netflix is protected in a large way against legal issues. At least that's my reading of this document.
Yeah, I think the conflicting nature of the document is that everything is outlined as if you're not supposed to use AI for things, but they finish almost every sentence that lays out a restriction with a sort of unless approved or unless you get consent. And the consent and approval in all of this is, from the way I read it, is between the partner and Netflix. It's not necessarily the artists and everyone else involved. It's specifically between Netflix and the partner. There are some things that are very explicit though when it comes to using, they call it talent or performers, actors in this case, I would assume, where they're very explicit that you need consent from them. I think because they are so well protected in the US now, the same way that other artists, singers, for example, are, and their songs are copyrighted. But visual things doesn't really have that same kind of protection. Sure, I mean, we talk about copyright and copyright infringement, but when we get down to it, artists like ourselves, we just don't really have that much firepower. So if someone takes our art and uses it for something, while we'd like to do something about it, legally, financially, that's hard for us to actually enforce. And I think this policy kind of rides on that, let's call it, issue, because unless you can prove that you've been infringed upon, and a lot of other people have that, and I don't know, make a massive lawsuit, it's going to be kind of hard to enforce some of this. And I think where it gets really confusing with the whole consent or get approval from Netflix is that we don't know what their internal policy looks like for partners actually getting approval, right? So it could go one of two ways. It could be that Netflix they have this for legal protection, just so it's out there. And then if you write to them and you want consent to use whatever model to train stuff to generate images or video, is that they most of the time just go, yeah, sure, we'll approve it. it could go the other way, where they're very strict, right? And they have security audits, and they need to check on your studio, how you store the data, which training data you've used, all that. We just don't know. So it's the policy almost seems like a moot point because we don't know what goes into the approval of actually using AI generated content.
So here's an interesting one. This is a sentence we specifically found in it. There are many sentences like this, but this is more of an indication of it. It says, Gen AI should not be used to generate main characters, key visual elements, or fictional settings that are central to the story without written approval. When I first checked that or read that, it was like, so this actually restricts the use of AI, like in a very real sense. You can't use it for key visuals or really anything that's important to the story. So what's the point then? You're not going to fundamentally rework your whole pipeline just to make some background props or something, right? That's just not that big of a game. And then we check out the last sentence or the last 3 words of without written approval. And that is where this stuff here gets tricky, because what on earth does that mean? Like Morten mentioned, there are 2 scenarios here. One of them is that they're going like, all right, this needs to go up to legal, and we need to approve absolutely everything. This goes through multiple layers of scrutiny, and we need to really make sure that this is all good. Copyright is respected, ethics are respected. Or like maybe a tech company, massive company like this might do, is they are just going, yeah, we're just going to approve all of it.
Yeah, and it's dangerous because there's a part in there as well where they talk about, I can't remember, it's like data management or the environments or whatever it is, but storage of data and reuse of data or models can't be used on more shows, or it's only for that specific project. But again, it's sort of like overruled by the unless you get consent phrasing. And so it's I think it's actually almost a more dangerous policy, because it opens the pathway for studios to be like, okay, so at least we can try something. And I don't know, in a way, it makes me sad that a bigger company like this can't just decide what they want to do. One thing if they just went like, okay, cool, we'll just support AI. Okay, at least we know where they stand. And that was a big thing for us, was it last year? I think it was last year, where very quickly we came out and said that we support artists and not AI. That was a big thing for us, because we were artists ourselves. Everything we represent is about art, the journey, and learning and everything. So we wanted to be a very pro artist marketplace and a pro artist company. And more companies are starting to come out now where they're pro artist and pro art that way, but it's still we're still playing this weird waiting game, right? Where we don't know what's going to happen legally. Morally, I think most of us are pretty much on the same side, that we can tell which parts are stealing and which parts are wrong, but there still seems to be this weird confusion amongst people. And I don't know when that's sort of going to get resolved. I think we need larger companies like this to actually take a firm stand and be like, okay, we're pro artists from here on out. We don't want AI generated stuff in our shows, for example. That would be a huge thing.
I think they actually are taking a firm stand there, because you can either go pro AI or anti AI, and I think they're deliberately going, we will see where the wind blows. And I think this is going to be a living document you're going to be seeing changing as stuff changes. It's going to be like they're talking about this ever evolving legal landscape, which means we don't really know entirely what the rules are about AI, or we know what they are, but we know that they're not enforced. Right, you're seeing like Meta just stealing an insane amount of books and intellectual property, but there's no punishment to it. Maybe they're just waiting now to see if are they actually going to be punished in the end or not for this. But I think I fundamentally don't think a company like Netflix is an ethical or even unethical company. I think they're aethical, like they're just amoral, like they're not really pro or against anything. It's just a massive enterprise. We spoke a bit about this before recording here, but I think Netflix fundamentally is as ethical as like any other massive tech company, like Amazon or like Meta or anything like that Obviously, they might be a little bit on the other side here, but regardless, I don't think they're pro artists in any way. And I think this document here is to protect themselves in most ways. I think they protect themselves from three things. I think the first one is just pure legal issues. I think they just want to make sure they don't run into any legal trouble whatsoever, because that is very expensive and it's terrible for reputation. You're just bogged down in lawsuits at all times. You have very expensive lawyers, and just newspapers are going to be writing about this all the time. And the second thing is they seem to be pretty afraid of unions, or at least unions starting to act up. And this is a very legit fear, because they have done that fairly recently. I think it was 2023 where they had the writer's strike, which is very much a union-based strike, where it shut down movie production for a long time. What was it, like 6 months or something like that, where nothing was basically shot. You couldn't write anything, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of that, like here in London right now, where a lot of my friends are still unemployed as a direct result of that writer's strike. So they don't want to mess with unions. Like it's a lot cheaper to just adhere to the general rules of the game that we currently have, instead of, messing around with that. Suddenly you can't get scripts, or you can't get actors, or nothing will be built on set. And the third one is that I think the audience, they don't really like AI. It's hard to say, right? We're artists, we're in this bubble of artists who we want to preserve our own jobs and careers and such, but I still don't think people really like AI. I think if there was a movie that came out that was fully AI, even if it looked fine, it was interesting, I think there would be a lot of pushback against this one. So I think these are the three things they're trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid legal issues, union issues, and then general pushback against, like, the public turning against them. Because at the end of the day, they care about how many subscribers they have and how much money these subscribers are paying Netflix.
Yeah, because they're a public company, right? And so their number one mission isn't to protect artists or the field, the industry, whatever. Their number one priority is to make money, and to make more money next year than they did last year. And taking a firm stance against AI is very, like, you don't know where it's going to go. So that could be very risky. I understand that. I still think it's the wrong approach, obviously, because I'm against it myself. But yeah, I still think it's interesting that it comes out and on the surface it actually looks like it's a good thing, but it just happens to be very legalese and not actually there. I don't feel like there's a lot of substance in it, and I think maybe that's also why I haven't seen this being published or focused on by Netflix themselves. It's mostly just news outlets that have picked up that a new AI policy came out from Netflix. Nothing more than that, really.
The reason I think this is interesting isn't because we're policy wonks or anything like that. I mean, reading through a company's terms of service isn't particularly interesting. But what I think is really interesting is, what can this mean for the overall industry? Because there's one massive thing here that that is entirely unknown. Like, currently, this is for the vendors. This presumably would be people who are producing content directly for Netflix, like maybe it's a Stranger Things season or something like that, for VFX vendors, or people doing intros or anything like that, or music producers, or people like that. But what we don't know, as far as I know, this is unknown, is does this apply to content that Netflix would be licensing? This would be movies that other companies have made, like Universal or Fox or any one of these companies. So if that is the case, and they don't want AI on their platform, that means that this is basically like a bar for the industry. That means that if Universal wants to make money after the cinema run, and they want to get this for streaming, and you can't get it on Netflix, I mean, that's a big risk, right? They might make a lot of money on Netflix, and if they can't get it on there, that's obviously not good for them. So often, like in this case, you might even be able to just make the production a little bit more expensive, build this with traditional tools, and then you get the post box office revenue boost with Netflix. Or maybe this is the case that this doesn't apply to this whatsoever. But regardless, I still think it's really interesting as an industry document, because obviously Netflix is massive, but I don't think people necessarily understand how massive Netflix actually is. a significant chunk of all VFX has been done globally the last, like, I don't know, 10 years or so, has been done by Netflix. Like, it's definitely a certain percentage of all work that's been done by Netflix. Multiple VFX companies started even TV departments just to cater to, if it's not Netflix, it's also like Amazon or the other companies. And also because of the success of Netflix, you had companies like Amazon start up their own TV departments to create things like Rings of Power. So Netflix is a massive company that they send waves throughout the whole industry. So there are really two directions this can go with their approach here. Either like they are really strict with how they're enforcing it, or they're not. And if they're really strict with enforcing it, it's hard to predict exactly what can happen. But what could happen is that this really means that adoption is significantly slowed down of generative AI industry-wide, because it's just not really worth it to do that. So for instance, if you were to create key visuals with AI, maybe whole characters or whole scenes or whole sequences, even like maybe whole movies with that, and Netflix, and you can't go on Netflix because you can't sell it to Netflix, or it means if you need approval at every single step, that's just going to slow everything down. For instance, if you want to just make some posters that they are talking about here, if you want to make some posters for a show or something like that, or like background posters, right, in a like maybe a painting or something, a background of a show, then you might need approval for that. Let's say you have 10 posters and they all need to go through the hierarchy of first your own internal company that needs to be sent out of your studio, then it needs to go to Netflix, to HR, go through all the steps there, and then it has to go back through all these steps. This can take maybe, I don't know, a month to get a few posters approved. Just not even approved as artistically approved, but approved in terms of this is approved for, like the AI is approved in this use case. You might as well just do this in Photoshop, right? This is not where this is not going to take that much more time to do this in Photoshop, because of course the posters will be instantly generated with AI, but you have a lot of cleanup work required. You can't control it fully. So this is a lot harder than it seems. And another element here is that we don't know if they can use the tools that they want to use. If Netflix is really strict about their enterprise secure environments, like to call them, this means that you can't just use like a web browser or something that can be hacked, data isn't secured. If they're really strict about that, they might do audits like Marvel has been doing for VFX studios for ages now, where they go through and they just check that your software is compliant. And if they are strict with that, that means that the tools they can use is so, the amount of tools is so restricted, simply because these companies, the AI companies that are up and coming now, they're not spending time on security. They're spending time on making their tech demos look as appealing as possible. Enterprise security is just not a massive concern for them. So if this is the case that legally it becomes really difficult to get stuff approved, and secondly, if you can't use the tools, why would you use AI to create a show when you can just do it with traditional techniques? The traditional techniques are perfectly good. Like, there's nothing wrong with these techniques. Yeah, they're probably more expensive than AI on the surface, but maybe in aggregate they're not.
Yeah, I think the tricky thing there is that, like, whenever we've talked about this, whenever we've tested out any AI tools, the immediate response is kind of like this policy where you go like, "Oh, that's great," but then, you know, if you want to use it for anything else, or you want to tweak it or adjust it, it's like you can never get there exactly. It's always an approximation, which I guess that's the whole definition of an LLM, right? Everything is just an approximation. So like small tweaks or small edits, it's always tricky. And the cost associated with that, I mean, the amount of revisions in a concept department is crazy, right? You have to crank out a concept and you're like, okay, here's 10 more, here's 50 more. We're like, it's not really the vibe we're looking for. But if you're using a Gen AI to do that and it's completely off, then that's not going to be of use to anyone, right? And especially if you then go through that entire process, like Henning says, and up the chain, up to Netflix, then back again. Oh, we can't approve this poster. We got to tweak these two posters because these two words are off. And hopefully that can scare people away. You know, I want to give Netflix the benefit of the doubt. I just have a little bit of a hard time because they're I just looked it up, $500 billion company. And I inherently just distrust that because that is because it's a for-profit company. And, you know, a company should obviously be for profit. That's not what I'm saying, but yeah, I just this land. I don't have a lot of faith in companies or people when it comes to this whole AI thing. I I I think I might be a little more cynical when it comes to that, with the whole view of with people and AI. I think we in our little bubble, we're so focused on it, right? Because it's our livelihood and it's everything that we do. But I personally don't think that people outside of that really care. I mean, they might care about the general thing of AI, where it's like, oh, okay, this can affect my job. But if it's like an AI taxi driver, where it's just, oh, you can get it and it's cheaper. Okay, great, I'll take that. It's a film that comes out and it's much faster to produce and it's cheaper. Not that they're gonna reduce the ticket prices because of that. They're just gonna pocket the difference in profits, right? I just have a hard time seeing people actually care whether it's done with AI. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's kind of like special effects to VFX kind of thing where people are actually very passionate about it and they want to see something traditional or they want to see, human suffering behind it. This was created with blood, sweat, and tears by artists over a period of 5 years instead of 2 years by a machine that just accepted inputs. It can become a very dystopian future, and we've talked about this privately as well, where it's like we were so surprised that visual the visual field was one of those first fields that got so much that was focused on so much by AI, and all of a sudden, we just had Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, and we had these incredible tools that could generate worlds so quickly, and were so imaginative in what they were doing. It was kind of depressing that you could spend so much time as an artist to just get semi dethroned by an input here and there.
Yeah, this has had a real impact on illustrators, particularly for concept art. That's more about the idea, right? That where people screw up for concept art is they assume concept art means pretty pictures. Concept art is fundamentally about good, strong ideas, and obviously LLMs are not great at that. But for illustration, which is just like a nice little picture, like the barber right around the corner here has a massive poster of an AI picture of just like somebody who's had a nice haircut, right? Like they don't really care about that. But this is where it's one of the things that is a bit concerning about the many things concerning about the policy here by Netflix. But one of them is that they're pretty much straight up allowing people to use AI for like VizDev, right? For exploration, mood boards, for concepting and all that. And sure, if that's the only thing that comes from this, that people are allowed to use that and they can't touch anything else, like bad, but it could be worse. But a massive issue with this is that like this also kills industry jobs and junior jobs. Like what happens when you're not going to get hired as a junior anymore? This happens a lot in programming right now, or a lot of like legal stuff as well, where a lot of the junior jobs are done by AI. And it's not because the juniors themselves are expected to produce amazing results. Sometimes, of course, they are, but a lot of times they're investments into the industry, because it turns out the seniors of today were juniors 10 years ago. And what happens when you just cut away that whole thing? That's not good. Another thing is, of course, that the moment you use AI for creating anything new, you aren't creating anything new in a large way. It regurgitates stuff that's already existing. So it's really easy that everything becomes very samey, right? So it would be really nice if that wasn't just explicitly allowed to be used for pre-production, because it's not like pre-production is just generate some cool images, like you mentioned before, like, oh, just generate 10 images. The thing is, with concept art and these ideas is that they're highly specific. It's not just generate me 10 vehicles with guns on them. No, each thing needs to do something very specific with that. And that's also like a bit of a different thing here, but another big thing with AI, particularly for film production and such, is that it's almost like you have an actor that you can't control, like, at all. If you had an actor, like let's say you had The Rock on stage and he could not follow directions. Like you ask him to do something and he would just not follow, and suddenly would have 7 fingers, right? So this is something that's really tricky about the current generation of the tools, is that they might look great in a tech demo, but it doesn't particularly look great in motion when they need to act, right? It's a whole different thing. But also, you can't really make them do exactly what you want. This is a massive thing you learn when you're in VFX, or if you were to work on any kind of specific project with a highly specific output that, you know, all projects would have. The art directors and clients and executives and everything, they're very specific with their notes. They're not just like, yeah, this looks great, man. Just keep going. No. They're like, move the left eyebrows up 2 millimeters, right? Like, it's highly specific stuff. So I'm curious if this is something that's going to happen as well, where studios, they try to go all in on AI, but then they maybe maybe LLMs in general aren't made for this. Like, maybe they just aren't good enough, like, ever at this level of control, and they realize you actually just have to shoot stuff again and go back to that. It's really hard to say, but at least it's interesting seeing that at least Netflix is putting this out, because this is the first time I'm actually seeing anything like this. I haven't seen this before from any other company.
It's unfortunate for concept jobs, because I think that the models that we have right now are really good at concepting. Whether you like the concepts or the ideas, I don't know. I don't actually know, you know, the technicals of how it works, but people are able to generate pretty incredible things. I've seen some amazing sceneries that were AI generated, where you're like, I haven't seen this type of style or combination of things before. That's super creative. Let's call it that. And that's the type of thing you can use for a mood board, the type of thing you can use for previs, where it's like, this is the direction that we want to go. And that will impact jobs, because it's very effective at that. And at that stage, you don't really care about super fine-tuned directions. You don't go, that waterfall right there, can we just make it 20% smaller and slightly more magical? Sure, okay, if you're already an artist and you're using it in conjunction with AI, sure, you can do that. That would be an effective way to do it. But if you're like a pure input artist, let's call it that, that's going to be super tricky for you, right? The more hard ones, moving pictures, specific critique, like you mentioned, you know, we've been in countless dailies where not even the director, but just a supervisor goes like, the jiggle on the left pinky there, it's like, can we adjust that by maybe 10%? Where you're like, okay, yeah, let's just resim everything again, and then just let's wait for another daily. I don't know.
But don't change the image.
It might happen,
right? Like, that's the issue here. Is like, don't change anything else.
Yeah.
Like, the colors and textures, everything was to stay the same, but there's a jiggle on the left pinky. Right. That's where I think it would have a large issue with that.
Imagine that A being those two things, where you're like, you're in a daily and you're A being things is the way you're doing now. Where you're doing it is like, you're only looking for that specific wiggle on the pinky or whatever, but then all of a sudden the entire background also changes and it shifts perspective a little bit. Yeah. Obviously, I think that's going to be solved at some point, because it's getting good at a really fast pace. I think I always come back to that whole thing of, this is the worst it'll ever look right now. And we've talked about this before, I always see the same kinds of comments where people go, AI looks like crap, and this is bad, and this is, you know, it's just a horrible image. It's like, a lot of it looks really good. Sure, there can be artifacts and things that can identify it as AI art, but a lot of the times it fools a lot of people, especially with newer videos as well, where things are moving. It gets trickier and trickier. And so if a company like this, all of a sudden, where like they stand behind it, or the approval process is really easy, you know, what will happen is that obviously more companies will use AI. It'll get cheaper, it'll get faster to use. Like Kenny said, junior jobs will disappear. Then it's left to mid-level artists, senior artists, and then the senior artists move on. Maybe they retire. All of a sudden, we have a company where we don't have any entry-level positions. And oftentimes, the entry-level positions get the really crappy jobs as a way of training, right? And if that goes away, well, then what happens? Then we have to rely even more on AI. And then it's just it's a vicious cycle eventually, where everything is just controlled by AI and generated by it.
I think a large part of this is also going to depend on what will the general public think about this? Because we haven't seen anything outside of tech demos that have been generated as a full feature movie or anything like that, or a full episode of a
No.
TV episode or something like that. Because you might have an intro or something that they suspect that is used. So they used AI, or it's confirmed that it's used AI, and then it blows up on Reddit or Twitter for like 2 days, and then it dies down. But nobody really cares if you get a bad Reddit headline or something like that. What you care about is, does this actually impact anything? Do you lose subscribers in these cases? And I always find that this is so blown up. But if they actually start to genuinely replace shows like Duolingo is doing, right? They're replacing teachers with, or people who make the programs on Duolingo with AI. If that actually happens and it starts to have a negative impact on the product itself, then I think they're very much going to care about that.
In that vein, ArtStation is an interesting case study of AI, because I can't remember, it was Tim Sweeney or something who said that they wouldn't limit the progress of technology, so they would allow AI and everything just goes on the marketplace and their portfolio site. And when you go to ArtStation now, I mean, not so much the portfolio section, I feel like, but the marketplace section especially, it's just AI. Obviously, they introduced the filter, was like, don't show AI stuff, but people just don't tag their things with this is AI, so it's kind of useless. I do feel like the sentiment is starting to turn a little bit, specifically with ArtStation there, that people are like, there's so much AI stuff on there that you have to wade through so much crap in order to find the actual good products. And I think that's kind of an unforeseen consequence of just letting AI run wild on a website like that. And you could kind of hope for the same thing if it turns out companies become more pro AI, that the same thing happens, that you'll obviously recognize the AI shows, and people genuinely think that it's of lower quality and not as good, and therefore they choose not to watch it or support it. That would be the hope.
The fear I have is that a company starts to, maybe it's not Netflix, but maybe something like Netflix, that they pump a lot of money into AI and it works in the sense that the majority of people don't care and they're just going to be watching slop all the time. Like it's basically fast food, right? Like people they want obviously proper food, but they can't be bothered to make it themselves. It's the same thing here, right? Like where they just want to watch something. Maybe, it's in the background or something, but they still have their subscription and they're still paying those $10, whatever it is, to whatever company it is, and that starts to get really nasty. It's not that every single show is amazing. There are a lot of terrible TV shows out there, but at least a terrible TV show still supports people's mortgage, right? Like if you're a VFX artist, honestly, we never worked on anything good, right? Like all the stuff we worked on was kind of crappy, apart from like some weird shows here and there, right? But like most of the movies we worked on, they weren't particularly good movies because a lot of VFX heavy movies aren't. They are what they are, the Fast and Furious and such, right? But they still pay people's mortgage. They still pay for people's salaries and such for thousands and thousands of people. Well, if you just have some AI slop, obviously that doesn't do that, right? It centralizes the power in the hand of a few very powerful companies, like Morten mentioned, with like in the billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap. Not sure if that's what you want to centralize culture into a few executives in an American company.
And if you see that same thing happening with AI companies, then very quickly, I was just checking. So Netflix is the 19th largest company in the world.
Jesus Christ.
Just below MasterCard. And if the progression of AI is this fast and the acceptance is fast, then very quickly in a few years, obviously you'll start seeing those companies move up that list as well. I don't know. OpenAI, I don't think, is a publicly traded company yet. So it's hard to gauge, I think. But I wouldn't be surprised in a few years if that's going to be up there as well. So
I guess this basically concludes our musings on the AI policy. We didn't want this to be super technical. Obviously, it wasn't. It's more just our thoughts on it. The reason is simply because there is just no way to tell what they're going to do. But they put out a document here, and it's still very early days when it comes to AI. We just genuinely don't know what's going to happen. Maybe that Netflix doesn't know themselves. Maybe it depends on which lawyer you're talking to at Netflix. You have some technocrat who just loves new tech and wants to just experiment with that as much as possible. And you have some guy who's super conservative and don't want to even have the thought of a lawsuit happening, right? So we just generally don't know where this is going to be happening. If we see that this is changing and they keep adding to this, we will keep you updated. This is a very interesting, very scary field. So we are keeping our fingers on the pulse of of this. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video.
This video is a little bit vague, kind of like the Netflix policy. And
Yeah.
I think we're sort of waiting to see where things actually move in there. We've taken a stance, and we will continue to do that, support artists, and in a very pro-artist way. And we just kind of hope that, you know, other people, other companies follow in our footsteps. It is good to see some progress there, but we await just like everyone else. And I think we'll do more videos like this, not just on the Netflix policy, but on other things, AI as well, just to see if we can, you know, keep our fingers on the pulse and see what's happening. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.
Thank you so much.